December 15th, 1941, 0830 hours, Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. 8 days after Pearl Harbor, and the conference room smelled of victory. Cigarette smoke hung thick beneath mahogany beams. Admiral Matome Ugaki leaned over charts of the Pacific, his finger tracing shipping lanes from San Diego to Manila. "Aircraft carriers are fragile weapons," he said, addressing a room of decorated naval officers. "One torpedo, one shell, they burn like kindling." The other admirals nodded. They'd spent their lives in the church of the battleship. The doctrine was called Kantai Kessen, decisive battle, one apocalyptic clash of steel titans. Gun against gun, armor against armor, the way naval warfare had been fought since Trafalgar. Ugaki tapped the chart. "The Americans will rebuild their battleship fleet. That's when we'll engage them. Carriers are for reconnaissance, for spotting the enemy fleet, so our guns can finish the job." He had the numbers to back it up. The Yamato, pride of the combined fleet, displaced 72,000 tons. Her main guns fired shells weighing 3,200 pounds, each one. Her armor belt measured 16 inches thick. No aircraft bomb could penetrate it. No torpedo could crack her hull with its 153 watertight compartments. "Planes are mosquitoes," another admiral added. "Annoying, but ultimately harmless against proper warships." The meeting adjourned at 0945. They went to lunch. They discussed tactics for the real battle that would come. Battleship against battleship, the way Togo crushed the Russian fleet at Tsushima 40 years before. What they didn't know was that 1,300 miles south, a young American named Mitcher was already writing their epitaph. What they couldn't imagine was that in less than 4 years, their unsinkable Yamato would die in 2 hours, never firing a shot at an enemy surface ship. What they refused to believe was that the age of the battleship had already ended. On December 7th, 1941, at 0755 hours, when their own carrier aircraft, those fragile, harmless mosquitoes, deleted the American battle line from history in 90 minutes. The Americans called him Pete. Vice Admiral Mark Andrew Mitcher, 5'7", 130 pounds soaking wet. Face like a dried apple. At 58, he looked like someone's disappointed uncle who worked in accounting. He didn't. Mitcher was naval aviator number 33. He'd earned his wings when airplanes were still made of wood and fabric. In 1919, he'd tried to fly across the Atlantic in a seaplane, crashed 200 miles short, rescued by a freighter, never mentioned it again. In 1942, he commanded the USS Hornet when Doolittle's bombers launched from her deck to bomb Tokyo. By April 1945, Mitcher commanded Task Force 58, 11 aircraft carriers, 6 battleships for escort, 8 cruisers, 46 destroyers, 1,300 aircraft, the largest naval aviation force ever assembled by any nation in human history. And the Japanese thought carriers were fragile. Mitcher operated from the flag bridge of USS Bunker Hill. He wore a lobsterman's cap, sweat-stained, faded, completely non-regulation. His staff officers wore crisp uniforms. Mitcher wore the cap and a windbreaker. He looked like he'd wandered onto the wrong ship. He hadn't. His pilots loved him. He fought for them. When Admiral Spruance wanted to recover aircraft after dark, dangerous, easy way to crash, Mitcher ordered every ship in the task force to turn on their lights. Hundreds of vessels, lit up like a city. "To hell with the submarines," he said. His boys were coming home. Tsuringti, April 6, 1945. 2,000 hours. Flag plot aboard Bunker Hill. The intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Gilvin Slonim, handed Mitcher a decoded message. Japanese radio traffic, intercepted and cracked by codebreakers at Pearl Harbor. Surface Action Group departed Tokuyama. Course southwest. Mitcher read it twice. He removed his cap, wiped the sweat from the brim. Put it back on. How many ships? Best estimate, 1 battleship. Light cruiser, 8 to 10 destroyers. Someone in flag plot laughed. They're sending 1 battleship against us? Mitcher didn't laugh. He'd studied the Japanese fleet for 4 years. He knew what 1 battleship meant. Yamato. He'd seen the intelligence reports. 72,000 tons. 9 18.1-inch guns. The largest ever mounted on any warship. Armor so thick, you could park a truck on the deck plates. The Japanese had built her in secret, camouflaged the shipyard with hemp rope nets, published false specifications that listed her main guns as 16-inch weapons. Even now, April 1945, some American intelligence still didn't know her true capabilities. Where's she headed? Mitcher asked. Okinawa. The room went quiet. Okinawa, where 200,000 American troops were fighting 100,000 Japanese defenders, where 1,500 Allied ships sat anchored offshore, vulnerable, where kamikazes had been diving into troopships and destroyers for a week straight, killing thousands. If Yamato reached Okinawa, Mitcher studied the chart. He did the math in his head. Speed, distance, weather. The Japanese fleet would reach the picket line by dawn, April 7th. Get me a striking plan, he said. Every available aircraft. I want that battleship on the bottom before she gets within gun range of anything. The staff officers scrambled. One of them, fresh-faced ensign, 22 years old, hesitated. Sir, Yamato's anti-aircraft suite includes 150 guns, 24 5-inch, 126 25mm. Our pilots. Mitcher turned. The lobsterman's cap shadowed his eyes. Our pilots are better than their gunners, and there's 400 of us and 1 of her. The ensign swallowed. Yes, sir. Mitcher turned back to the chart. His finger traced the Japanese course. Southwest from Tokuyama. Through the Bungo Strait. Into the East China Sea. No carriers escorting Yamato. No air cover at all. The Japanese were sending their greatest battleship on a one-way suicide mission, naked under American skies, protected by nothing but anti-aircraft guns and samurai spirit. Mitcher almost felt bad for them. Almost. They think they're unsinkable, he said quietly. Let's teach them about aviation. At 2100 hours, Task Force 58 turned northwest. 11 carriers, 1,300 aircraft. The hunting party was moving. On Yamato's bridge, 400 miles away, Admiral Seiichi Ito had no idea what was coming. April 7, 1945. 0500 hours, 200 miles southwest of Kyushu. Yamato's bridge smelled of oil and salt spray. The sea was calm. Temperature, 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility, 12 miles. Perfect conditions for a battleship's last voyage. Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito stood on the bridge wing. He was 56, lean, quiet. A battleship man his whole career. He'd opposed Operation Tengo from the start. This is suicide, he'd told Admiral Toyota 3 days earlier. We have no air cover, no fuel to return. You're asking me to beach the Yamato like a kamikaze and use her as a shore battery until she's destroyed. Toyota had been blunt. The Emperor himself asked what the Navy was doing. This is what the Navy is doing. So here they were: Yamato, light cruiser, Yahagi, 8 destroyers, 3,700 men total, sailing south with just enough fuel for a one-way trip. The plan was absurd: beach the ship on Okinawa, fire the main guns until the ammunition ran out, then the crew would abandon ship and fight as infantry. Ito knew they'd never make it. But the alternative was watching the Navy sit in port, while the kamikazes died alone. At least this way, the surface fleet would go down fighting. On Yamato's deck, Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida checked his watch. 0522. Sunrise in 8 minutes. The sea was empty. The sky was empty. Maybe, he thought, they'd actually make it to aircraft contact, bearing 045, range 12 miles. The lookout's voice cracked over the intercom. Every man on the bridge froze. 12 miles. That was nothing. At cruise speed, a dive bomber covered that in 3 minutes. Ito grabbed his binoculars. He scanned the northern horizon. There. A single aircraft, high, maybe 8,000 feet, circling. American? Someone asked. Has to be, Ito said. The aircraft was a Martin Mariner, flying boat, long-range patrol. It had spotted them. Which meant... Ito lowered the binoculars. He looked at Captain Kosaku Aruga, Yamato's commanding officer. Sound general quarters. All anti-aircraft crews to stations. This is it. The alarm screamed through Yamato's corridors. 2,500 men scrambled to battle stations. Gun crews loaded ammunition. Damage control teams closed watertight doors. In the engine rooms, the temperature climbed to 120 degrees as boilers pushed the ship to flank speed. 27 knots. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The patrol plane circled, radioed their position, then left. Ito checked the clock. 0730. Maybe Task Force 58 was too far away. Maybe they'd get another 6 hours. Maybe they'd actually reach Okinawa before. Multiple aircraft contacts, bearing 020. Range 40 miles. 40 miles. Ito did the math. At 300 knots, the American aircraft would arrive in 8 minutes. How many? He asked. The radar operator's voice was barely a whisper. Sir, the scope is... It's covered. I count at least 200 contacts, possibly more. Ito closed his eyes. The Americans weren't sending a patrol or a squadron. They were sending everything. At 0830 hours, 100 miles north, the attack wave launched. Task Force 58 had spent the night steaming northwest at 25 knots. By dawn, they were in perfect position, close enough to strike, far enough to stay safe from Yamato's guns. The carriers turned into the wind. USS Essex, USS Intrepid, USS Hornet, USS Wasp, USS Yorktown, USS Bunker Hill, USS Hancock, USS Bennington, USS Belleau Wood, USS San Jacinto, USS Cabot, 11 flight decks, 386 aircraft, 280 fighters and dive bombers, 106 torpedo bombers. Every aircraft carried full ordnance. 1,000-pound armor-piercing bombs. Mark 13 torpedoes with 600-pound warheads. Some planes carried both. The pilots were young. Average age, 23. But they'd been training for 2 years. They'd sunk carriers at Philippine Sea, demolished the Japanese fleet at Leyte Gulf. They knew their aircraft like concert pianists, knew their instruments. The Grumman F-6, F Hellcat fighter. Top speed, 380 miles per hour, range 1,040 miles. Armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns and 2,000 pounds of bombs. The Curtiss, SB-2C Helldiver dive bomber, could carry a 2,000-pound bomb, could dive at 90-degree angles, could put ordnance through a pickle barrel from 10,000 feet. The Grumman TBF Avenger torpedo bomber, low and slow but deadly, could skim the waves at 50 feet, launch torpedoes that ran 40 knots, and exploded below the waterline where armor was thinnest. And there were 386 of them. Lieutenant Thomas Stetson, flying an Avenger from USS Hornet, remembered the briefing. "One battleship, no air cover, she's naked. This is a turkey shoot." Another pilot, Ensign John Carter, remembered thinking, "They built the biggest battleship in history and sent her out without fighters? What the hell are they thinking?" What the Japanese were thinking was simple. Battleships had been the kings of naval warfare for 400 years, since wooden ships of the line blasted each other with cannons, since ironclads dueled at Hampton Roads, since Jutland and Tsushima. Battleships were supposed to fear other battleships, not airplanes. Admiral Ugaki had said it himself, "Planes are mosquitoes." He was about to discover what 386 mosquitoes could do. At 1,000 hours, the American aircraft spotted Yamato. She was beautiful. Even the American pilots admitted it. 863 feet long. Gray-blue camouflage. Massive pagoda superstructure bristling with guns. The three main turrets, each holding three 18.1-inch rifles, looked like medieval castles. Lieutenant Stetson keyed his radio. "There she is! Christ, she's huge!" The formation split. Fighters went high, 12,000 feet, to suppress anti-aircraft fire. Dive bombers climbed to 10,000 feet. Torpedo bombers dropped to wave-top level, 60 feet above the water. The plan was coordinated chaos. Attack from all sides simultaneously. Overwhelm the defenses. Don't give the gunners time to focus. On Yamato's bridge, Ito watched the formation approach. He counted aircraft, stopped at 50, realized there were more behind them. "Hard to port," he ordered. "All guns open fire!" 10 hours. Yamato's anti-aircraft guns erupted. 24 5-inch guns, 126 25mm autocannons, 12.7-centimeter rockets that burst into shrapnel clouds. The air filled with tracers, red, orange, white, arcing toward the American formation like deadly fireworks. Ensign Yoshida, manning a damage control station, felt the ship shake as every weapon fired at once. The noise was apocalyptic. Continuous thunder. He couldn't hear the intercom, couldn't hear his own voice. An American fighter exploded 2,000 feet overhead, direct hit from a 5-inch shell. Then another. The guns were doing their job. But there were too many. The dive bombers came first. They rolled inverted at 10,000 feet, noses pointed straight down, accelerating past 300 miles per hour. The pilots aimed for the center of the ship, the massive deck, impossible to miss. Yamato's deck crew watched them fall. Some froze, some ran. There was nowhere to go. The first bomb hit at 10-12 hours. Midship, port side. 1,000 pounds of high explosive punched through the weather deck, exploded in a crew compartment. 15 men vaporized instantly. Smoke poured from the wound. Second bomb, aft deck, near the seaplane catapult. The catapult disintegrated. Fire spread to ready ammunition stores. 25 mm rounds cooked off like popcorn. Third bomb, direct hit on the pagoda superstructure. The blast killed 12 men in the fire control center. Yamato's main guns lost centralized targeting. Each turret would have to aim independently. And that's when torpedoes arrived. The Avengers came in low, 60 feet above the waves, 200 miles per hour. From 4 directions simultaneously, north, south, east, west. The plan was called a hammer and anvil. Force the ship to turn toward one group of torpedo planes, exposing her flank to another group. Ito knew the tactic. Every naval officer did, but knowing it didn't matter. He had to choose. "Hard starboard," he ordered. Yamato heeled into the turn, 72,000 tons pivoting like a dancer. Her screws thrashed the water. The turn was beautiful. Textbook. It didn't save her. Midships. Below. The first torpedo struck at 10:18 hours. Port side, amidships, below the waterline. The explosion opened a hole 30 feet wide. The sea poured in, 3,000 tons of water in the first minute. Second torpedo, port side, aft, near the rudder mechanism. Yamato's steering degraded by 40%. She could still turn, but slowly, like fighting with a broken arm. Third torpedo, same location. The rudder jammed at 15 degrees port. Now she couldn't steer at all, just circle slowly to the left, exposing her wounded port side to more attacks. It was 10:22 hours, 12 minutes into the battle. Yamato had taken 3 bomb hits and 3 torpedo hits. She was on fire. She was flooding. She could barely steer. And there were 300 more aircraft overhead. On USS Bunker Hill, Mitcher watched the strike reports come in. Each carrier radioed when their aircraft scored hits. The tally board filled up. 0 minutes. First bombs hit Yamato. 8 minutes. 3 torpedoes confirmed. 12 minutes. Cruiser Yahagi hit multiple times. A dead in water. 15 minutes. Destroyer Isokaze sinking. 18 minutes. Yamato's speed reduced to 18 knots. Mitcher sipped coffee from a tin cup. His face showed nothing. "How's our aircraft losses?" he asked. 3 fighters confirmed. 2 bombers probable. Still awaiting final count. 5 aircraft, maybe 7. Against the greatest battleship ever built. Mitcher nodded slowly. He turned to his chief of staff. "Prepare a second wave. I want her finished." Back on Yamato, Ensign Yoshida was waist-deep in water. The damage control teams were losing. For every hatch they sealed, another torpedo blew a new hole. The pumps couldn't keep up. The port list increased, 5 degrees, then 10, then 15. A 15-degree list on a battleship means the end is near. Yoshida sloshed through a flooded passageway, heading for the port-side compartments. His job was to seal a hatch before the entire section flooded. He was 22 years old. He'd graduated from the Naval Academy 9 months ago. He reached the hatch. It was jammed, warped by an explosion. He put his shoulder into it. Nothing. A 4th torpedo hit. The ship lurched. Yoshida slammed into the bulkhead. The lights went out. Emergency lamps kicked in. Dim red glow, barely enough to see. Water gushed through cracks in the hull plating. The roar was deafening. Someone grabbed his arm. Chief Petty Officer Takahashi, 53 years old, 30 years in the Navy. "Forget the hatch," Takahashi shouted. "We're abandoning this section. But the compartment is already flooded. Move." They climbed a ladder to the weather deck, stepped out into chaos. The sky was full of aircraft, everywhere, diving, climbing, circling. The anti-aircraft guns fired continuously but couldn't track them all. It was like trying to swat 300 Hornets simultaneously. Another bomb hit. This one struck the forward turret. The explosion, muffled by 25 inches of armor, did no real damage. The turret could still fire. But it didn't matter. There was nothing to shoot at. Yamato's main guns, Those magnificent 18.1-inch rifles were designed to engage enemy battleships at 25 miles. They could punch through 16 inches of armor. They could sink any surface ship afloat. But aircraft flew too fast. The turrets couldn't traverse quickly enough. The guns were useless. Worse than useless. They were weight, dead weight, slowing the ship, making her sluggish. The Navy had spent $250 million building the ultimate battleship, and she was being murdered by aircraft that cost $50,000 each. The math was brutal. The irony was crushing. 11:52 hours. Yamato had been under attack for 100 minutes. She'd taken 11 torpedo hits, 15 bomb hits. Her port side was shredded. Her list was 35 degrees. In the engine rooms, the temperature reached 140 degrees. Steam pipes had ruptured. Men died from burns. Others drowned when the compartments flooded. The engineers kept the boilers running. They had orders. Keep the ship moving. Don't stop. They didn't stop. But the ship did. At 12:05 hours, the port list reached 45 degrees. Yamato rolled like a dying whale. Men slid across the deck, scrambled for handholds, tumbled into the sea. The anti-aircraft guns went silent. You can't aim when you're standing on a wall. Admiral Ito stood on the bridge. He'd been here for 7 hours. He'd watched his flagship die by inches. Captain Aruga approached him. Aruga's uniform was torn. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. He saluted. "Sir, we should abandon ship." Ito shook his head. "I'm staying." "Admiral." "That's an order, Captain. Save your men. I'm staying." Aruga saluted again. He didn't argue. You didn't argue with an admiral on a dying ship. He turned to the bridge crew. "Abandon ship! All hands abandon ship!" Sailors poured onto the weather deck. The list was 80 degrees now. The ship was nearly on her side. Men jumped. The water was cold, 58 degrees, but better than going down with the ship. Ito walked to his cabin. He removed his jacket, sat down at his desk. He wrote a final message. For the Emperor, for Japan. At 14:02 hours, the list reached 90 degrees. Yamato rolled completely. Her starboard side pointed at the sky, her port side submerged. Ensign Yoshida clung to a railing. He watched the ship die. The water was coming. He couldn't swim. He couldn't let go. He was going to someone grabbed him. Chief Takahashi. "Jump, you fool!" They jumped together. 14:23 hours. Yamato's forward magazines exploded. 1,200 tons of high explosive. Cordite, shells, powder bags. It all went up at once. The explosion was visible from 100 miles away. A mushroom cloud rose 20,000 feet into the air. The shockwave knocked American pilots sideways in their cockpits. Lieutenant Stetson, circling at 8,000 feet, watched the fireball bloom. He keyed his radio, but couldn't speak. Just watched. The mushroom cloud was so large, so bright, that sentries on Kagoshima, Tutakan Citifis, 200 miles away, saw it and thought the Americans had dropped an atomic bomb. They hadn't. They'd just finished what they started. Yamato broke in half. The bow sank immediately. The stern lingered for 30 seconds, propellers still turning, then slid beneath the waves. 14:23 hours and 40 seconds. The greatest battleship ever built was gone. Total time under attack, 133 minutes. Ensign Yoshida floated in the East China Sea, clinging to wreckage. Oil covered the water. Fires burned on the surface where fuel leaked from ruptured tanks. Bodies floated everywhere, hundreds of them, some alive, most not. Destroyer Yukikaze pulled alongside 3 hours later. They rescued 276 men from Yamato, out of 2,498. Yoshida was one of them. So was Chief Takahashi. Admiral Ito was not. Captain Aruga was not. They'd stayed on the bridge, gone down with the ship, like captains had done for 1,000 years. Yahagi sank too. 4 destroyers, 3,665 men total lost from the entire task force. The Americans lost 10 aircraft, 12 pilots and aircrew. On USS Bunker Hill, the pilots returned. They landed one by one, wings folded, tires squeaking on the deck. The deck crews counted them, checked for damage, rearmed the aircraft for the next mission. Mitcher met them in the ready room. He stood at the front, hands in his pockets, lobsterman's cap pushed back. "Yamato?" he asked. "On the bottom, sir," Lieutenant Stetson reported. "Blew up like the 4th of July." Mitcher nodded. He walked to the front of the room, studied the pilots. 23 years old, average. Kids, really. Kids who'd just sunk the most powerful surface combatant ever built. "You did good work," he said quietly. "Yamato was their symbol, their pride. Now she's gone. And they know they can't stop us. Not with battleships. Not with anything." The pilots said nothing. Some looked proud. Some looked exhausted. One kid in the back, 19 years old, 3rd mission ever, looked like he wanted to cry. Mitcher noticed. He walked over, a hand on the kid's shoulder. "You all right, son?" The kid swallowed. I kept thinking about the men on that ship. They never had a chance." Mitcher was quiet for a moment, then, "No, they didn't. But that's not your fault. That's their admiral's fault. They sent those men out with the wrong tools, put them in a coffin, and called it a battleship. You did your job. That's all any of us can do." He squeezed the kid's shoulder, walked out of the ready room. In his cabin, alone, Mitcher removed his cap, sat down. He walked over, put a hand on the kid's shoulder. "You all right, son?" The kid swallowed. I kept thinking about the men on that ship. They never had a chance." Mitcher was quiet for a moment, then, "No, they didn't. But that's not your fault. That's their admiral's fault. They sent those men out with the wrong tools, put them in a coffin, and called it a battleship. You did your job. That's all any of us can do." He squeezed the kid's shoulder, walked out of the ready room. In his cabin, alone, Mitcher removed his cap, sat down, stared at the wall. He'd just proven that the battleship era was over, that carriers were the future, that the Japanese admirals had been wrong about everything. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. Back in Tokyo, Admiral Ugaki received the report at 1600 hours. He read it twice, set it down, picked it up, read it again. Yamato sunk. Total loss. 2,498 dead. Cause? Carrier aircraft. He walked to the window, looked out at Tokyo Bay. The remnants of the combined fleet sat at anchor. A few cruisers, a handful of destroyers. No carriers, no battleships. The Navy was finished. Ugaki thought about the December meeting, about his own words. Carriers are fragile. Planes are mosquitoes. He'd been wrong. No, not wrong. Blind. The Americans had seen the future at Taranto, when British torpedo planes crippled the Italian fleet in harbor. They'd seen it again at Pearl Harbor, when Japanese carrier aircraft shattered Battleship Row. The evidence had been there for 4 years. But the Japanese admirals had worshipped at the altar of the battleship. They'd clung to Kantai-Kessen, decisive battle doctrine. They'd believed that armor and guns would always triumph over speed and altitude. They'd built Yamato and Musashi, the 2 largest, most expensive, most powerful battleships in history, and used them as symbols instead of weapons, kept them in port, saved them for the decisive battle that never came. And when they finally sent Yamato to fight, they sent her without air cover, without escorts, without a prayer. It wasn't strategy, it was suicide dressed in patriotic rhetoric. Ugaki returned to his desk. He drafted his resignation. He knew it wouldn't be accepted. Admirals didn't resign in the middle of a war, but he wrote it anyway. At the bottom, he added a single line: "We built the finest sword ever forged and brought it to a gunfight." That night, across the Pacific, 2 70